Myrna has worked for me for 12 years, and she has never once sent me a text message in the middle of a morning. Not when the kitchen pipes burst in February of 2019. Not when she found a water moccasin curled up on the back porch that one August. She is not a woman who reaches for her phone unless something requires it. So when her name lit up on my screen at 10:43 on a Monday in October, I already knew. Not what, exactly, but I knew. I was 40 minutes from home, heading south on I-40, back toward Durham, windows cracked against the October chill. I had just dropped my son Gideon and his wife Vera at the departures terminal at RDU, watched them disappear through the sliding glass doors with their rolling carry-ons and their matching North Face jackets. 3 days in Seattle, Gideon had told me. A real estate investment conference. He had seemed distracted all morning, checking his watch twice in the car, and Vera had been unusually pleasant, the way a person is pleasant when they are managing something, and they need you not to notice. I told myself I was imagining things. I am 67 years old, and I spent 35 years in the IRS Financial Crimes Unit. Suspicion is an occupational hazard. I see it in everyone now. The slight hesitation before an answer, the way eyes move when a number doesn't add up. Cecily used to tease me about it. She'd say, "Alton, not everybody is hiding something." And I'd say, "Baby, I've seen the returns." She'd laugh and I would too, and for a while I managed to believe her. Cecily passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, 7 months from diagnosis to the end. The house in Durham still smells like her when the windows are open and the wind comes through from the east. I keep her photograph on the mantel in the living room. She's standing on the dock at our lakefront property in Lake Lure, wearing that yellow rain jacket she refused to throw away, laughing at something off camera. Every morning I walk past it on my way to the kitchen. Every morning I say good morning. I never stopped. I glanced at the screen and felt the bottom of my stomach drop. "Mr. Briggs, please pull over. Do not go home. Open your security app. Right now." 3 sentences, no punctuation on the last one. That's how I knew. I pulled the Subaru onto the emergency shoulder near exit 279. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. Old habit from too many years in rooms where showing your reaction is the same as losing. I unlocked the phone and opened the home security system. I had installed it myself 2 years prior. 18 cameras, motion sensors on every exterior door, audio pickup in the common rooms. Cecily always said the house was going to outlive both of us, and it deserved to be looked after properly. The front door camera loaded first. There was an Uber Black parked in my driveway. I switched to the living room feed. Gideon was standing in my living room in the same charcoal jacket he'd been wearing at the airport 40 minutes ago. Vera was walking past him toward the hallway, her carry-on abandoned by the front door, heels clicking on the hardwood I had refinished with my own hands the summer after Cecily died. They were supposed to be boarding a flight to Seattle. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to thank those of you who are watching this. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if this story speaks to you. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means more than I know how to say. I sat on the shoulder of I-40 while 18-wheelers shook the frame of my car, and I watched my son and his wife move through my house like they were already the owners, because they believed they were about to be. I turned up the audio. "Is the locksmith coming to the back?" Vera was asking. Her voice was clipped and operational. This was not a woman improvising. This was a woman executing a plan. 45 minutes, Gideon said. He was rubbing the back of his neck, a habit he's had since childhood. He does it when he's anxious. I have watched him do it his whole life. Fletcher said he can have the office door open in under 10 minutes once he's inside. My home office. The one with the secondary deadbolt I installed after Cecily's diagnosis, when I started keeping all the important documents in one place. The deed to the Lake Lure property, the investment account statements, the amended trust paperwork. "Fletcher's been paid?" Vera asked. "Half up front, half after. He's not walking away from the second half." Vera moved toward the fireplace. I watched her scan the mantel, the photograph of Cecily, the brass candlesticks, the dark blue jewelry box I keep there because I cannot put it anywhere else. She crossed the room and picked up the box. I had to grip the steering wheel. Inside that box is Cecily's engagement ring. Round brilliant solitaire, platinum band, modest by some people's standards, but I had saved for 8 months on a government salary to buy it. I proposed at a rest stop outside Knoxville, Tennessee, because we'd been driving back from visiting her sister, and I simply could not wait one more hour. She said yes while eating a gas station honey bun. She thought that was the funniest thing in the world. She wore that ring every single day for 31 years. Vera turned it over between her fingers and said, "White gold. Could get 4, maybe 5,000 if we're not in a hurry." Gideon looked at the mantel. He looked at his mother's photograph. He said nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know about what my son had become. I did not cry. I am not built for crying in moments of crisis. The training goes too deep. But I felt something fracture in my chest, quiet and precise, like a fault line giving way far underground where you can't see it happen. The surface doesn't move, but the foundation shifts. I had 2 choices. I could turn the car around, drive home, walk through the front door, and look my son in the face, and ask him what exactly he thought he was doing, standing in my living room with a woman holding his dead mother's ring and calculating its resale value. I have watched that confrontation play out over 3 decades, in interrogation rooms and depositions and courtrooms. It never goes the way you want. The target gets defensive, destroys evidence, lawyers up. You get the satisfaction and nothing that will hold. I put the car in drive and merged back into traffic, heading away from home. I called Weston Coe on the second ring. Weston retired from the Department of Justice 3 years before I did. He does estate and financial litigation now out of a firm in Chapel Hill. He is the most methodical man I know, and he does not startle easily. "Talk to me," he said, because Weston answers the phone like he's already expecting bad news. I told him everything I'd seen in under 4 minutes. The airport drop, the Uber back, Gideon, Vera, the name Fletcher, which Weston recognized before I finished the sentence. "Fletcher Rand," Weston said, "disbarred in 2021. Notary fraud, contract forgery. He keeps a network of mobile notaries who will stamp anything for the right price." A pause. "Alton, how much is the Lake Lure property worth?" "Current market, about 1.3 million. Weston made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then, "You know what you're asking me to do." "I'm not asking you to do anything except be ready. I need a few hours." I stopped at a hardware store 2 exits back and bought a prepaid phone, a baseball cap, and a flannel shirt. I changed in the parking lot. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I looked like any other retired man on his way to fix something that should not have broken in the first place. I drove back and parked 2 streets over, in the lot of a Baptist church that sits empty on weekdays. I opened the security app and watched the house from there. Fletcher Rand arrived at 11:20 in a white cargo van with no markings. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, carrying the easy confidence of a man who has done something dishonest so many times it no longer registers as risk. He picked my office lock in under 8 minutes. I watched Vera lead him straight to the filing cabinet in the corner. "Property deed should be in the second drawer," she said. "Manila folder labeled Lake Lure." She knew because Gideon had told her. Gideon knew because I had shown him, 3 years ago, when I was updating my estate planning and wanted him to understand where everything was. I had sat with him at that desk for 2 hours going through every document. I had done it because Cecily asked me to before she died. She said, "Make sure he understands what we built, Alton. Make sure he knows it's real." I had thought I was honoring her wish. What I had actually done was hand them a map. I watched Fletcher photograph the deed and send the image to a contact who would prepare a forged transfer. Then he said to Gideon, "I need account statements from the past 2 years. The acquisition loan application needs supporting documentation." Gideon went to the second cabinet, bottom drawer, without pausing to look. He knew exactly where to go. That ease was too practiced. My son had been in that office without my knowledge before, more than once. I called Weston back. "Pull the records from the investment account," I said. "Cross-reference any outgoing transfers from January of last year to now." A pause, keys clicking. Then, "Alton, there are 14 withdrawals totaling $214,000, all kept below $10,000. Classic structuring." Structuring, the practice of keeping transactions under the federal reporting threshold to avoid detection, a federal crime. I had spent a decade building cases against people who did exactly this. My son had been stealing from me for 18 months. I sat with that for a while in the church parking lot. Not the money I could survive. But the 18 months, the Sunday phone calls, the holiday dinners, the patient, careful architecture of a betrayal that had been under construction long before I knew the first brick had been laid. I ate a gas station sandwich that tasted like cardboard, and I made a plan. At 2 in the afternoon, Gideon called my personal phone. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. Easy, a little tired, the voice of a man who had been home alone all day. Hey Dad, warm, practiced, how are you doing? Getting some rest? Oh, quiet without you two around. How's Seattle? Flight go okay? A pause, short, but I am trained to hear pauses the way a musician hears a wrong note. Yeah, smooth flight. Layover in Denver was a little long. Hotel's nice, though. And there it was. In the background of the call, barely audible under his voice, the low, measured tone of my grandfather clock in the front hallway. Mahogany case, Westminster chime, strikes every quarter hour. There is no clock in any hotel in Seattle that sounds like that. I said, good, call me tonight, and I ended the call. I called Weston, get your contact at the Charlotte FBI field office on standby, and put a flag on any transfer attempt for the Lake Lure parcel number. Flag went in 2 hours ago, Weston said. Nothing moves on that deed without a call to me first, and I already called Charlotte. I drove back before sunrise the next morning. Myrna was waiting at the back door with coffee, and the kind of silence that means she has been awake most of the night, too. I stood in my own kitchen in that flannel shirt and was grateful she was there. They were in your office until midnight, she said, shredding things. That was a miscalculation. Shredded paper doesn't touch electronic records. It barely inconveniences a federal investigation. At 8 in the morning, Gideon and Vera came downstairs to find me sitting at the kitchen table with my crossword and my coffee mug, the way I sit every single morning. Gideon stopped in the doorway, and the color in his face went wrong. Dad, he said, you're here. It's my house, I said pleasantly. I looked at him. I did not look away. I came home early. The place gets quiet. Vera recovered faster than he did. She smiled and said good morning, and asked if I wanted her to make eggs. I said no thank you. I said, sit down, both of you. They sat. I thought in the early morning dark driving back about whether to give Gideon a moment first, whether to ask him the way I had asked him things his whole life, directly, without theatrics, just the two of us and what was true, whether something of what I remembered about my son was still in there, underneath whatever this had made of him. I looked at him across the table. He has his mother's eyes. Same gray-green, same slight tilt at the outer corners. Cecily used to say he got her eyes and my stubbornness, and that combination would either make him extraordinary or get him into serious trouble. Is there something you want to tell me? I asked. He glanced at Vera. 1 second. But I have been reading people since before he was born. No, he said. Dad, I don't. What are you talking about? I placed my phone on the table between us. The security app was open on the living room camera from the day before. Fletcher Rand's white van in the driveway. Gideon standing in my office doorway while the man photographed the deed to the only piece of land on earth where I still feel close to my wife. No one spoke. Then Vera said very quietly, that's not what it looks like. Vera, I said, I spent 35 years at the IRS. Please don't. Gideon was staring at the screen. He was looking at himself, at the image of himself standing in his dead mother's house going through her filing cabinets. And I watched something move through his face. Something I wanted to believe was recognition of what he had actually done. Son, I said, I'm giving you this moment. Whatever comes next, and I can't stop it. But I'm giving you this one moment to say something true to me. I haven't had a true thing from you in I don't know how long, and I would like one. He looked up. His eyes were wet. He opened his mouth. Vera put her hand on his arm. He closed it. That was the moment. After that, it was paperwork. 2 agents from the Charlotte FBI field office arrived with Weston at 9:15. One of them, Agent Solis, had 11 years in financial crimes. She looked at the documentation Weston produced with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a meal that has finally arrived. Fletcher Rand was picked up at his apartment in Cary at the same time. The forged transfer document was on his laptop. The mobile notary he'd hired was cooperative within the first hour. Vera tried 3 approaches in 4 minutes. Misunderstanding, then she needed her attorney, then she said I had manipulated the camera footage. The third was the most creative and the least sustainable. I stood on the back porch while they worked. There is a line of red maples Cecily planted 15 years ago, one for each year we had lived in that house. They were at their peak, the kind of red that doesn't look real. Weston came out and stood beside me. "The trust structure you set up 2 years ago," he said. "Every asset of material value is in the Cecily Briggs Family Trust. Gideon was a contingent beneficiary only. He had no legal standing to transfer the Lake Lure deed regardless of what Fletcher prepared. Even if the forgery had been recorded, we could have vacated it within a week." A pause. "The structuring charges are federal. 18 months of documented transactions. Wire fraud, conspiracy. He's looking at 5 to 8 years minimum." I looked at the maples. There is something I have not told anyone until now. 6 months ago, the first unusual withdrawals appeared on my statements, and I hired a former colleague, a private forensic accountant, to look into things quietly. I spent 6 months watching, building the file, waiting to see if Gideon would stop on his own, or come to me, or show some sign that there was still something of who I raised him to be. He did not stop. He accelerated. He brought in Fletcher. He bought Vera plane tickets he never intended to use. I had known for 6 months. I had given him 6 months to choose differently. They brought them out through the front door at 10:30. Gideon looked at me as they walked him to the car. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and for a moment he was not the man who had stood in my office going through my filing cabinets. He was just a frightened person who had made choices he could not undo and had run out of road. I had spent 34 years trying to make sure he never reached a place where he had run out of road. Vera didn't look at me at all. 3 weeks later, I drove to Lake Lure on a Saturday morning. I walked out onto the dock and stood in the cold November air and looked at the water, which was dark green and still. The week before, I had signed papers transferring the property to the Cecily Briggs Educational Foundation, a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for first-generation college students in western North Carolina. Cecily grew up 20 minutes from that lake. She had put herself through Appalachian State, working the overnight shift at a textile plant, and she believed, without irony, that knowing how money works is the difference between surviving and actually living. I stood on the dock for a while. A pair of loons were out near the middle of the lake. The morning was cold enough to matter. Gideon called me from the detention center 14 days after the arraignment. I sat in the kitchen and watched his name on the screen until the ringing stopped. I am not a cruel man, but there are calls I cannot answer yet, and I have made my peace with that. Perhaps someday there is a version of that conversation I can have. I don't know. Some questions the water doesn't answer. I walked back up the dock toward my car, and I left the lake behind me, and I did not look back. They say you cannot recover what has been taken from you. I don't think that's quite right. You can't recover the specific thing. But if you follow the money, all the way back, the way I was trained to do, without flinching and without hurrying, you find what was actually yours to begin with. And what was yours to begin with is still there. It was always there. It just needed someone willing to look. I drove home with the windows down. The November air was cold enough to feel real. I turned the radio to a jazz station out of Asheville and let the miles go by, and somewhere past exit 64, for no reason I could name, I began to feel like myself again. If you have ever had to sit with a phone in your hand and decide whether to pick it up or let it ring, leave me a comment. I read everyone, and if this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Ivory Vengeance and hit the like button on your way out. I have more of these to share, and I will see you in the next one.